Good day, everyone. This is Ohio Dan. So this video is an addendum to the series that I just made, giving my sort of point of view on where things are in the men's community, how things have changed over the last several years, since I basically discovered the men's community around 2014, and since I started making content in 2017. And I wanted to discuss kind of a revelation or a change in opinion that I've had since even the first part of this video that I did a few weeks ago, right? My viewpoint on one thing in particular has shifted a little bit, and that is the sort of foundational difference between the MRA versus the MGTOW perspective. And in the first part of this video, I talked about how I thought the main difference between MGTOW and MRAs, men's rights advocates versus men going their own way, was basically a difference of strategy. Because I know that I agree with 95% plus of what MRAs talk about, even though I gravitate more to a MGTOW point of view or a MGTOW philosophy. Because I don't think that the system in general can be reformed in a way to actually treat men fairly. I don't think society really has interest in that at this point. I don't think there's a way to generate that interest. I think society is so kind of hopelessly gynocentric that the best that men can do is probably walk away from a system that more or less wants to exploit them rather than trying to change that system itself. And I talked about how I don't think those things are mutually exclusive, that you can walk away from the system and at the same time advocate for reforms that could benefit men. But at the same time, some of my sort of experiences, particularly on Twitter, and I'm going to describe what those were as briefly as I can, have kind of changed my opinion on whether there's more of a foundational core difference between how MRAs seem to see things versus MGTOW, and how I think there's more of a gap between how at least some MRAs view the situation for men versus the MGTOW point of view. So I want to briefly describe when I found the men's community back around 2014. I kind of found the MRAs before I found most of the MGTOW content creators. I did find TFM and a few others, but I also was kind of introduced to Rocking Mr. E and Karen Strawn and some of the other more MRA-leaning people, or in the case of Rocking Mr. E, a very anti-MGTOW content creator back in the day who was very much for men's rights but didn't believe that MGTOW was a solution. And I kind of was basically persuaded by some of their arguments initially that, you kind of have to advocate for yourself and you can't just give up and all that kind of stuff. And around that time period, I started to argue with feminists online and to some extent in real life. And I, at different points in time on Facebook, I remember arguing with a feminist about all these points that I made, that men have no recourse in cases of domestic violence, and men clearly are prejudiced against when it comes to the family courts. And you can look at the suicide rates, you can look at the rate of homelessness. It's clear that these issues are problems for men, and it's also clear that feminists don't care about those issues, right? And I got into the trap, basically, of arguing with feminists and arguing with normies in general that are not either acquainted with these issues for what they really are or just don't really have an interest. And I learned pretty quickly that you really have two sides of the argument when it comes to gender-based debates or debates about where things stand between men and women. You have your dominant feminist point of view, right? The point of view that's basically won more or less in society today, about men basically being the root of all evil, and we just need to do more for women no matter what, and it doesn't matter whether more women go to college than men. We need more scholarships for women to get into STEM. Or it doesn't matter whether women are just as likely to be abusive in a relationship. We need more domestic violence shelters for women because men don't deserve help, basically. And it doesn't matter whether men have no reproductive rights. You need to care about a woman's right to unrestricted access to an abortion. but men, your reproductive rights consist of don't stick your dick in crazy, and if you get a woman pregnant, it's on you, and so on and so forth. All these obvious contradictions, things that clearly place women in a position of power or advantage over men, that if feminists were actually intellectually honest, clearly they would actually want to help men now at this point. And I used to get into debates with people, I would say for several months, at the longest, maybe up to a year, I tried doing that. And I found very quickly that on one side of the coin, you have the feminists, and then on the other side, you have some traditional conservatives, and that neither side really cares about men. I don't feel too much of a need to describe the traditional conservative argument, right? Men and women are different and feminism's bad, but that's because feminism doesn't help women in the right way. And men just need to man up, and men just need to take charge of things, and all that kind of stuff. Neither side really cares about men. And I don't know whether I consciously reached that conclusion, but subconsciously I realized it was a futile effort to argue with feminists, to argue with women in general for the most part, your average women out there at least, and even a lot of men that have been captured by the feminist ideology and really aren't willing to think rationally themselves. Right? It became clear that feminists are not interested in intellectual honesty, they're not interested in the truth, and arguing with them is a complete waste of time. It took a while, but not incredibly long, for me to figure out that having these conversations with normies and with feminists and with most women in general was a complete waste of time because they didn't care about the facts, they didn't care about the truth, and they didn't have any desire to be reasonable. So fast forward to now. I learned that lesson several years ago. I started being more active on Twitter recently. And I'm not going to get into what I think about that platform very much. I'm really not impressed with Twitter. It seems to me like Twitter has basically two purposes: a popularity contest and shitposting. But I'm not going to get into my views on that very much here. I might keep my Twitter account and keep using it, but I'm not impressed with what it seems to be good for, which is really not a whole lot if you're not concerned about what other people think about you all the time. But other social media outlets can be like that as well. At least on Facebook, you talk to people you actually know, right? Like people that you actually have personal connections with. Twitter doesn't even have that going for it. So that's an aside that I'm not going to get into. But I basically followed several MGTOW guys and several MRAs as well, and people that I kind of know within the men's community. And the point that I'm getting to is that some of the MRAs were having certain conversations with one another. And I decided to get involved in some of those conversations. And I was surprised by some of the things that resulted from that. And I'm going to give two examples, and I'm going to be as brief as I can so that this video doesn't become another 40-minute diatribe. But the first example was from a female MRA that I know has been in the men's community for quite some time. And I'm not going to say who specifically it is because that's not the point. The point's not to try to create some sort of personal drama. But someone who has flat out said men should consider going their own way. They should consider MGTOW. Someone that seems to be friendly toward that idea. Now, I'm not going to go into whether all the female content creators within the Manosphere are all chameleons, they're all like that or not. I don't believe that they are all like that. I think some of them actually want to help men, and a good number of them don't. And that's not the topic of what I'm trying to say here. The point is, she had made a post that basically tried to encapsulate the idea that feminists know that they're being intellectually dishonest. And basically what it said was, and this is my interpretation, right? This isn't going to be a word-for-word thing, of course, that feminists rely on men caring about them to have their voices heard, but then they try to claim that men need to care about their issues more. They claim that men don't care about women, while they know darn well that without men, they wouldn't have a platform. They wouldn't have a voice. They know that they're lying more or less when they say that men don't care about women's issues or feminist-based issues. And her question sort of that was contained within that tweet was, when are the feminists going to admit that they know and rely upon men actually caring about them and caring about what women have to say? And my response to that was, no, they're just going to continue to use their femininity and their sexuality to get men to do what they want them to do. And the thing about Twitter, another thing I don't like, is unless you subscribe to the paid version of Twitter, you can only make a comment that's so long. And so it's very difficult to make a strong, well sort of structured point with only having a couple of sentences basically that you can write. And I'm not good at that, right? That's another thing, is you could tell by the videos that I make a lot of the time, I'm not very concise a lot of the time. That's why the first version of this was 40 minutes long, right? So basically, I try to convey that feminists don't care about being intellectually honest. Their bread and butter has been to get men to think with their dicks, and I didn't say that, but that was the thought process, and to basically use their sexuality and their femininity to manipulate men. And the response that I got from this female MRA really surprised me, because it wasn't like, yeah, I get what you're saying, or yeah, but I wish they could be intellectually honest. It wasn't even anything neutral. It was kind of a nasty back and forth where it was like, you're missing the point. You're not recognizing that feminists are being intellectually dishonest on purpose. You're not seeing that they rely on men for their support, and they should acknowledge that, basically. And I'm not saying all this to complain about a negative interaction on Twitter. I know some people may say that. That's not the point. I'm getting up to the conclusions that I've drawn from all of this experience. It's just like we were talking over each other's heads, though. And she ended up being sarcastic. She ended up sort of just not really acknowledging what I was saying, or trying to say, that feminists don't care about being intellectually honest. That's not their game. They've gotten where they are and have been successful by using their femininity and their sexuality to get what they want from men, and just treating men poorly because men are stupid enough to accept that, basically. Why are you insisting that feminists need to be intellectually honest when there should be no expectation for them to do so? I'm going to leave that there and go on to the second example.